This is 5 Live Formula One with Jack Nichols.
Good afternoon. Welcome to third practice ahead of the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, the 8th round of the 2022 Formula One World Championship. We have another hour coming up, but the start of the session will be delayed because of a crash at the end of the Formula 2 race a moment ago. They are still repairing the barriers down at the first corner. Now, it looks as though they're kind of mostly done, to be perfectly honest with you, so I don't think it'll be a huge delay, but the session won't quite start on time. Alongside me is Mark Priestley, the former McLaren mechanic, and also Andrew Benson, the BBC's chief Formula One writer. And yesterday, Charles Leclerc set the fastest time for Ferrari, a 1 minute 43.224, a quarter of a second quicker than Sergio Perez, 3/10 quicker than Verstappen, although admittedly Verstappen didn't get his first lap in on the soft tyres because Perez went off ahead of him at turn 15. Fernando Alonso was fourth. Carlos Sainz also not getting a representative lap in on the soft tyres, so he was fifth quickest. Mercedes were down in seventh for George Russell, and down in 12th was Lewis Hamilton. So a bit of a delay for the start of this session. Another pleasant day in Baku, 27 degrees the air temperature, and Ferrari really turned up yesterday, Mark.
Well, it was kind of a tale of two halves, wasn't it, the day yesterday? Because in the first session, the early morning FP1 session, we saw a massive advantage to Red Bull, which is perhaps what we might have expected coming into the weekend. This is a circuit that certainly on paper looks like it might suit that straight line speed advantage that Red Bull have. But then we had a break, of course, between the sessions where the drivers and teams go back to the garages, they pore over the data, they have a debrief, and they make some tweaks and changes to their cars. And when we came out in the afternoon, that advantage that Red Bull had all but gone, and the picture became actually quite blurry. I mean, like you said, we didn't get that all-out run from Max Verstappen, so maybe that blurs the picture a little bit, but certainly it looks very, very close by the end of Friday. And of course, they'll have been doing a lot of hard work overnight. I'm really intrigued to see where we all sit come FP3.
Andrew Benson.
Well, Jack, we noticed that Ferrari's form improved a lot between first and second practice yesterday, and it turns out what they did was fit a new rear wing. It's a lower drag version of their wing. They took it to the Miami Grand Prix and tried it, but didn't race it there. But they did try it yesterday in P2. The reason they didn't put it on in P1 is they didn't want to risk a crash with the green track, lack of grip and everything. But Matteo Binotto, the team principal, was saying this morning that they were encouraged by it because it's behaving exactly as the simulation suggested it would. And what it did was it fixed their issue of straight line speed compared to the Red Bull. I think it cut their deficit from Red Bull to Red Bull from something like 27 kilometres an hour on the straight to 12 kilometres an hour on the straight.
Wow.
But it maintained their speed in the corners. They're gaining 3/10 through the sort of middle, it's not the middle sector of the lap because the sector lines are slightly different, but basically from turns 4 to the end of the castle section, 3/10 Ferrari gaining on Red Bull there, and Red Bull aren't gaining enough of that back on the straights to catch them up over one lap. Also, Charles Leclerc was saying yesterday that his tyre degradation was very good, so he was encouraged by that too for his race performance potential.
If Red Bull had a new rear wing, or Mercedes had a new rear wing, are they not putting it on until free practice 2? Are they trusting Verstappen and Hamilton to not put it in the barriers?
I think it depends on the track, doesn't it? I think if they're running it in Barcelona, then they'd probably put it on in P1. But if you're running it in Monaco,
so you think Toto Wolff, Mercedes have a new rear wing, and Toto Wolff is going, better not give it to Lewis in FP1 because he'll put it in the wall?
I know where you're going with this. You're making a point about Ferrari's drivers being a bit crashy, aren't you?
and I'm asking for your answer.
I don't know. You'd have to ask Matteo Binotto. I bet he wouldn't give you a straight one.
I think it does depend on how many components you've got. But given the advantage we've seen it's made to that car and how important it's going to be for the rest of this weekend, particularly in the race, this straight line speed, where that's really going to come into play is on race day, because that's the point where you either get overtaken or you do your overtaking along that incredibly long straight. So that rear wing is going to play really into that top speed advantage or disadvantage that a team has. So I get why you can't risk it, or you don't want to risk it in the least representative of all the sessions, which is FP1. But of course it does hamper the drivers to some extent in terms of getting a feel for the car on a street circuit where a lot of that performance comes from getting the driver into that groove. So it is a slightly confusing one, but I sort of understand why they've done it.
So as I say, start of the session is delayed, but they are just repairing the barriers at turn 1, and they're just putting the advertising on it basically, so it's not exactly the most pressing of issues, but they are very much near the completion.
I'm sure the advertisers would disagree with you.
Well, yes, exactly, but my point is that we can't be far away if they're just putting the stickers on now. And down at that first corner. So if you're thinking about buying a watch, then keep your eyes peeled at turn 1. Sergio Perez, quicker yesterday than his teammate Max Verstappen at Red Bull, but of course, as we've mentioned a couple of times, Verstappen didn't get that run in. And Mercedes, I mean, it's been a real... Mercedes this year, they've looked better and then they've looked worse and then they've looked better and then they've looked worse and then they've always just ended up being third quickest. And yesterday felt like another example where suddenly Hamilton was bogged down in the midfield, and where did Russell wasn't best of the rest because he was slower than Alonso's Alpine and Gasly's AlphaTauri, but I can't help but think they'll just be 5th and 6th again today.
Well, there's a giant gap, isn't there, between the top 2 teams and everybody else. I mean, an enormous gap, at least half a second at most places we go, and it's Mercedes that tend to slot into that gap. So they're too far away from the front 2 in most cases to start challenging them on a regular basis yet. But they've also got a slight buffer behind that if they get a good weekend together, they should be able to slot in as the 3rd best team. I mean, the confusing picture with Mercedes is that, as confusing as it is, I'm sure, for them, is that they haven't really understood the problems that they've had with their car for a long time. We got to Barcelona, they kind of announced that, they've got this new floor on the car, they've understood many of the issues, they've finally got a handle on it, and that will then enable them to start working towards fixing it. Then we went to Monaco, again a slightly confusing picture, the bouncing came back, and what we saw yesterday along the very long straight here in Baku is that bouncing is perhaps worse than ever. So they've still got work to do, haven't they?
I think it's an alarming weekend for Mercedes, actually, because Barcelona, as you say, they thought they'd fixed this porpoising problem that they have with the sort of airflow getting disrupted under the car above a certain speed on the straight, and the airflow attaching and reattaching at high frequency, and that causes the bouncing. At Monaco, the car was bouncing, but it was a different thing. It was grounding, it was to do with the unevenness of the track, so that wasn't necessarily an indication that they hadn't fixed it, but this is. They're not the only team having it. Ferrari have got it too, but it's a question of where it starts and which parts of the track it affects the car on, and Mercedes are having it earlier, so it's happening for them through the kinks at the early part of the straight, whereas Ferrari starts later, so it's less alarming for them. Also, another thing that Mercedes still haven't fixed is the drag issue. The car is losing a second just on the straight parts of the track to the Ferrari and Red Bull. That's not going to be an easy fix either. So I think we're basically a third of the way through the season now, Jack, and it's of course it's a long season. Of course it's Mercedes. You don't want to write them off or anything, but it is beginning to look as if this car is just not good enough, and they're going to have a rethink for next year.
And how doable is like a rethink, almost, I don't know, not from scratch, but a rethink for next year?
Scratch, because the question is, does their whole philosophy work with the current regulations? They're the only car with this sort of zero side pod effect, which leaves a lot of exposed floor. You look like you've got to say something about barriers, Jack.
No, I'm looking at this machine. Is this machine relaying tarmac over or asphalt at the exit of the first corner? Is that what it's doing?
I can't.
Or is it cleaning it? I can't quite see. There's this truck, and it's got this big mechanical thing on the front that's going from left to right, and it looks like it's sort of relaying a top layer of asphalt almost.
I wonder if it's high pressure cleaning. If there's oil gone down after an accident, it could be that it's a very, very high pressure.
Oh, and that's water going down. Yeah, maybe.
It could be that with a detergent, perhaps, to get rid of the oil. But yeah, it's an interesting bit of kit. I've not seen that before.
No, nor have I.
The Mercedes thing's an interesting one because they have, as Andrew says, gone down a very different path aerodynamically to most, or to every other team, in terms of their top surfaces around the side pods. And they've done that, of course, because they firmly believe that it will offer an advantage if they can get it to work. They've been hampered in that, and they haven't really found whether that works properly or not in terms of what performance it can give, because of the bouncing effect that's coming from the underside of the car. And as Andrew said, because the side pods are so narrow, there's so much floor exposed that the theory is that floor then flexes so much more and really highlights the problem that everybody has suffered to some extent with the bouncing coming from the underside. So they can't simulate the bouncing effect in the simulators and in the wind tunnels in the same way you see it on the real track. And that's been one of the real problems for everybody in 2022, but Mercedes perhaps worse than anyone. So the idea of ditching this whole philosophy and going back to square one, it's not impossible. Of course you can do it, and if they're going to sort of almost write this season off to some extent, the rules stay the same next year, so any work you do now in terms of starting afresh would continue into next year. So it's not that it's a lost cause, but it's a huge chunk of budget and resource and time that's just kind of been wasted if you have to go back to the drawing board again. So, I mean, a real tough and difficult decision for Mercedes, and one that I'm sure they'll have already had lots of conversations over, but not an easy one to make.
But if they go back to the drawing board, they won't be winning next year.
Well, it's not
surely
necessarily.
But my theory being that Red Bull and Ferrari have had their philosophy. They've created this race-winning car. Then they've had a year developing it and understanding it better. If you go back to the drawing board for next year, you're a year, 18 months, almost 2 years, pretty much, behind on development. So how can you possibly just build a car and win?
Well, I totally get what you're saying. I mean, they are at a disadvantage 100%, but you know, they are very good at building race cars. They've gone down a route here that hasn't worked, and I think they've been caught out by all the data they've had before the car ever hit a racetrack said this philosophy works. You get it onto a racetrack, it hasn't worked. So they know how to put the thing together. They've got great people, great designers. If they, now knowing what they know about the car on a real racetrack, can go back to the drawing board, I've full confidence in them they could build a very, very good car. And yes, they might be on a slight back footing, but I don't think it would take them long to get back up to the front. But it's a decision that has to be sort of made now if that is what you're going to do, because in the same way that the cars we're seeing on track now, this time last year, were all well underway in terms of development, Mercedes would have to start doing that now for next year if that's where they want to go with it.
Yeah, absolutely. The session is due to start at 3:15 TBC, so that's in 9 minutes' time. The clock hasn't started, interestingly enough, so I thought that it would start and they would just sort of have it red flagged, basically, because you don't stop the clock in a practice session because you have to finish the session 2 hours before qualifying begins. So we'll keep an eye on that one. Maybe when it does start, it'll readjust. We'll wait and see.
Kind of odd to give a time and then say that's to be confirmed. I don't think I've ever seen that before.
No, I guess like that. We'll start at 3:15. Is the plan? Is what TBC is standing for there?
I mean, this is what a lot of teams and onlookers were confused about last time out. Some of the messaging from the FIA, wasn't it? And the communications coming out of the FIA. And there's a lot of talk behind the scenes about various people being upset about that, whether you're a fan watching from home or whether you're in the garages trying to plan, you know, your run plan and things like that. The communication, it feels like, at least from the last few races, hasn't been as clear as it could have been, and I guess that's
it was an absolute mess at Monaco. I'm just going to read out.
That's what I'm sort of teetering around the edge. Benson's gone straight in.
I'm just going to read. Well, the teams were really angry about it. I'm just going to read out what I wrote after the race, just because it makes it clear. So, the teams have to fit their tyres 5 minutes before the start, and it takes 2 minutes to fit the set of tyres on the grid, right? So why did the FIA give them only a 9-minute warning that extreme wets would be required? So they've got like that's 2 minutes window, basically. But what that led to was like all the tyre fitters running madly around the grid.
Yeah.
And the team's thinking, oh my God, someone's going to get hurt here. So they all got in touch with the race director, which was Eduardo Freitas in Monaco. It's Niels Wittek again in Baku, to say, look, you've got to delay the start because this is dangerous. And he did delay it by another 10 minutes. Then at the second start, he called for extreme wets and a safety car start 20 seconds after the cut-off time for the tyres to be fitted. I mean, it's a joke. You know, it really is.
Yeah.
And the teams are not happy about it. And it feeds into this thing that we've been talking about for a few races now, a general dissatisfaction at the way the FIA is conducting itself on a number of different levels, whether it's the FIA president appearing to say in an interview after Monaco, you know, he basically said, you know, should the drivers be imposing their views on people, I wouldn't do that. I'm paraphrasing, but that's basically what he said. And then a clarification, in inverted commas, a day later on Twitter, because obviously he had quite a lot of pushback from that. The sprint race thing is still not resolved. Do you remember that the teams in the Formula One agreed to have 6 sprint races next year instead of 3? And Mohammed bin Sulayem, the FIA president, pushed back against that, said no, I want to... Publicly, he said, I want to investigate what effect that does on FIA resources. I'm told that privately he asked for more money for the FIA to do it. The FIA deny that, but a number of sources have told me that is absolutely true. It was more than €1 million he asked for behind closed doors. And of course, people are still unhappy about Abu Dhabi and the fallout from Abu Dhabi and how that was handled through the winter. Peter Bayer, the executive director of Formula One's just lost his job at the FIA and been replaced by a woman called Shayla Ann Rao, who used to work at Mercedes, and before that the FIA. And then the drivers are also complaining about inconsistency of stewarding decisions. Some drivers getting penalised for some things, other drivers not getting penalised for other things, and question marks about safety and how that's being operated. For example, with the barrier at Miami, where there was the crash for Carlos Sainz, and the FIA refused to put a barrier in there, even though the driver said it needed one. They said it was a freak accident. Lo and behold, Esteban Ocon went and had exactly the same crash the next day. So it goes on and on and on, and this is sort of bubbling on in the background, which is why yesterday, final point, in the press conference, the drivers were asked, are you happy and satisfied with the way the FIA president, the FIA running the sport? None of them wanted to answer. It was really awkward. Eventually, they did come up with political answers that sort of addressed the issue. But so I guess, yeah, long story short, no one's very happy with FIA at the moment.
And I think it's really tough to have. So take the Monaco start situation, for example. And I think it's really tough to have two race directors who are... I'm not actually 100% sure, honestly, if Nils Wittek is doing anything else, because I think he got dropped from the DTM race director job, didn't he, before he joined F1? So I don't know if he's doing another. But Freitas, I mean, he's race directing Le Mans this weekend, presumably. Yeah. And so when he's race directing in Monaco, it's a lot to ask someone to be fully across all of the rules and procedures that are required in Formula One. And to me, I don't say this is Formula One in terms of it's better than any other sport, but the race director has to be across, just sort of has to know the rule book inside and out. And you can't know the F1 rule book and the World Endurance Championship rule book inside and out, in my opinion.
Better is a subjective judgment. Bigger is not. Formula One is much bigger and much more high profile than exponentially than any other form of motorsport on the planet. Hang on. So you can't afford to make mistakes like this. You know, that's the issue. The standards have to be higher.
I mean,
I think the teams would argue the FIA are not meeting those standards.
In an ideal world, you'd have the high standards, whatever you're doing, right? That's all I'm sort of trying to allude to there. But
But the idea of, exactly as you say, if you're across two championships, as an example, with two enormous and detailed rule books, which have differences, make no mistake, they are different to each other. When you're in a situation, go back to the one that happened in Abu Dhabi at the end of last season, we looked to our race director to make a snap decision, which was a crucial one, a really important one that affected the championship. I think most people will accept that he probably got that wrong. But if you're trying to memorise or draw on the detailed regulations that you should know inside out, and yet you've got two sets of those in your mind, how on earth do you know in that snap moment, that split second, that you're getting the right one? I agree with you on that one, Jack. I think it should be a sole focus, almost a full-time job in itself, because that's what it requires. So I do agree with you, and the whole idea about this sort of start time announcement, this the confusion that happened at Monaco, I can tell you from my experience of being in the team, I mean, that may seem slightly trivial, but it's not, because these things are run like military operations. You know, you have to be split-second perfect with all the systems and the procedures that you go through, particularly in the build-up to a Grand Prix start, both for safety as well as operational reasons. And if you have those kind of confusing messages coming out, it's very difficult to do that.
Nils Wittek left DTM to become race director for Formula 2 and Formula 3 was the plan. But I think that, so it may have been incorrect of me to suggest that he sort of lost that position. But there was a lot of controversy at the final DTM race of the season last year at the Norris Ring. A lot of controversy, because basically one driver just cut the hairpin.
Is that the one where someone just took someone out?
Yeah, exactly. But took it out so the teammate could win the championship or something. I don't remember the specifics of it, but it was not great, and Wittek came under a lot of fire for that. So yes, but then he left to go to Formula 2 and Formula 3, but then Massey was fired, and so now he's at Formula 1. So it's all a little bit around the houses, but I just wanted to clarify that.
We should say it's an incredibly difficult job, and I'm not sure any of us would want it. So I don't want to make it sound.
Would you not?
No,
I'd be well up for it.
Would you? Well, let's put you forward.
I'm not qualified in any way, but I'd like to do it.
Well, it's a tough job, and I think what we saw.
Are you scared of tough jobs?
No, I'm not, Jack. No.
I've seen wheeler dealers. It looks easy.
That looks like an incredibly tough job to me, and what we saw off the back of Abu Dhabi last year was a race director coming under the most intense fire, much of it justified, but what needed to come out of that was exactly the opposite, the clearest and most concise clarification of any rules and communication, and that's the opposite of almost what we're seeing at the moment.
So the session has begun, and there is still 1 hour on the clock, with Stroll going out on circuit, 59 minutes and 33, 32, 31, 30 seconds left. And it's very interesting that they've put an hour on the clock. But because that's, as far as I can remember, never happened in my time covering F1. The clock just, I remember all the times in... there was China where the helicopter couldn't take off a few years ago because of the cloud. There was Austin when it was really, really rainy, and the sessions get rained off. They don't delay it, and then the clock starts. And then... Well,
of course, it has a knock-on effect to support races and other things that are happening, part of the race programme, and then on to qualifying this afternoon. So we'll have to see what happens to the rest of the schedule. Yeah. But we are underway.
Yeah. Andrew, would you like to be race director?
I'd think about it.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, blimey. I'm gonna nominate you both. Right, the sound you can hear then is Mick Schumacher in his Haas out on the circuit, one of the first cars to start circulating. Difficult day for him yesterday. He missed the entire first session after a water leak on his car very, very early on, so only had FP2 to get any data and any running in, so this is a particularly important one for him. But all cars now gradually making their way out onto the circuit. We've got Lance Stroll, Mick Schumacher, Sebastian Vettel and Kevin Magnussen so far.
And the two Mercedes are queued up at the exit of the first corner doing some practice starts. Hamilton out first, and then Russell. A reminder, hashtag BBC F1 and F1 at bbc.co.uk if you want to get in touch over the course of the session. And Russell making his way onto the circuit. Stroll has already returned to the pits, so just the installation lap there, and then carrying on his way. JJ says, recently saw the Senna film again and struck by how fast the onboard footage seemed compared with today. Was it due to the quality of cameras or the position of the cameras? They seem lower down to today. And yeah, one of the big things is basically the camera suspension, for want of a better phrase. It wobbled around so much in the olden days and in the early 90s, late 80s, when they started doing these onboard cameras, that it really gave you that sort of sense of speed. And the onboard cameras today are so cushioned and give you such a stable picture that it does look a bit slower, which is a curiosity. And it's the same. There was actually a really interesting article about this in Autosport magazine months and months ago now, where they spoke to Dean Locke from Formula One management, and he was also saying the other thing was, in the olden days the cameramen were a lot worse. So, and it would be local cameramen who wouldn't be used to doing Formula One, so all of their panning would be really wobbly and it would be all over the place. Plus, in the olden days, it was 4x3, not widescreen, so the cars were always running out of picture. They were always running out of space on the screen, so they always looked quicker too. So there's all these things that
plus your telly's probably bigger today, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So all of these things made Formula One look a lot quicker.
Although, I have
in the
to
olden
say,
days.
we got a really nice onboard shot yesterday. I think it was from Lando Norris's driver eye view, you know, the helmet cam, and with the bouncing that these cars are suffering along the long start-finish straight here in Baku, I have to say it looked a little bit like that. It was very violent almost as they're bouncing down the straight there. So a number of drivers mentioning that overnight, how brutal it feels from behind the wheel. Questions just, I guess, starting to be asked whether this is something that Formula One should just accept or whether they need to do something about it.
Andrew.
So on the timing of qualifying, there's the 2 hour time frame is still there. Article 39.1b of the sporting regulations, qualifying practice will take place on the second day of track running and will start no less than 2 hours and no more than 3 hours after the end of P3. So it can't start, according to the regulations, it can't start earlier than quarter past the hour in whatever it was, 3 o'clock, isn't it, in the UK?
Yeah, so there's other people sort of reporting that as well, that so qualifying will start at 15 minutes late.
Yeah.
Or so say the rules.
It's a bit stupid, isn't it?
As you said, Jack, it's not something I have seen before, or that I can remember seeing before. I did wonder when I started looking at the rules, is this another mess up by the FIA?
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking as I went into the rules, because I thought the reason that usually the reason they don't, they shorten the session if it starts late, if it's practice. Or, for example, if it stops with the red flag, they keep the clock ticking. The reason for that is because of these time schedules.
Yeah.
And the reason the time schedules are there are because of TV, effectively. Yeah. So they've now basically delayed all the global TV broadcasts by 15 minutes.
So if you've set your VCRs, anyone's doing VCR?
Yeah, that's a very weird one. That's very strange indeed. Well, we'll see what happens at 3:15 later on today. I think we can watch the start of Le Mans now, because that starts at 3. So we can watch the opening 15 minutes of Le Mans and then crack on with qualifying. Maybe it was intentional all along. Although, yeah, maybe we'll be on air. What time are we going on air then, boss? We're still going on air at normal time, so we just got to fill for 20 minutes before qualifying now. Oh dear. We got right. Well, we'll get planning on that then over the lunch break.
Effectively shortened our lunch break.
Yeah, exactly. 53 minutes and 30 seconds on the clock.
Yeah, I'm not sure the audience cared that much about that
one. You'd be surprised about what our audience care about. Into the pits comes Lance Stroll. Again, a sort of second installation lap done here, and Schumacher back in the pits. Vettel doing another run through as well. He's out on the hard tyres, and Steg saying what Andrew Benson is doing there is demonstrating why he should be the F1 race director.
He's definitely putting a case forward, isn't he?
Yeah, no doubt.
Okay.
So 6 cars have done an install lap. Vettel and Stroll have done another install lap and then returned to the pit lane.
Well, given the sort of small number of cars that have actually been on the circuit so far, you'd be forgiven for thinking this is not a particularly important session, but it really is, in that this is the last time that the teams and drivers can get out on the circuit ahead of that all-important qualifying session. It's also the first time they can get on circuit after all of the work that happened overnight, from learnings that came from the data and the feedback from yesterday's sessions, and that's a lot. A lot happens across a Friday night. These are the big changes that the drivers feed back to the engineers. They then interpret those, plug them into the systems, and the system will help spit out some answers to what might cure the problems, give them some advantages. So they need to get out on circuit. The reason lots of people are not at this point is that it's also a street circuit, so it evolves quite dramatically over the course of a session as the tyre rubber goes down. So the big teams, the guys at the front particularly, are kind of hanging on because they don't want to waste laps, or in a relatively speaking waste laps on a circuit that's less representative in comparison to the one that they'll be on this afternoon in qualifying. So they're trying to let a little bit more rubber go down, let the temperatures stabilise on the track and the ambient conditions, and then they'll get out there and do those all important runs.
Why, when you're a mechanic, do you ever think like the engineer's a bit of a fool? And they're like, oh, can you make this change to the suspension? And you're like, no, why? What are you? Or does that not really happen because you're not in all of the sort of meetings and stuff to know why it's happening?
No, I did sit in those meetings towards the end of my time at McLaren. And you do, everybody has disagreements, but in any walk of life, in any office environment or anything. So
well, look at me and Benson.
Yeah, so it does happen, but look, it's definitely, I know it's a cliche, but it is kind of one team. You win and lose as a team, and that is genuinely the ethos that runs through it. So, I had trust in my engineers, they had trust in me, and vice versa, and you have to kind of stick with that.
Do you know I've actually been a race engineer once?
Have you?
On trials?
No, on Formula One.
What do you mean?
I was a race engineer for a morning at a Tyrrell test at Silverstone in 1996.
This needs
Mike Gascoigne and Mika Salo.
So,
and I wrote an article about it.
Very good.
is it still available for Autosport?
Yeah. It's long before my BBC time, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so we need to get in the Autosport archives then.
Yeah.
1996. So what, so you're on the... So you're going, box this lap, Mika, sort of thing?
I'm not sure the radio was communicating to... I'm not sure they had radio comms at that point. The 5-lap run, but then he'd come back and he'd debrief, and I'd have to decide...
Really?
What did we do? Did we more front wing, less front wing, softer front springs, harder, stiffer front springs, etc. Yeah.
What track? Silverstone.
Silverstone, yeah.
Full or like Stowe
Full,
or something?
Yeah. Oh, amazing.
So,
did you make the car go more quickly?
Yeah,
we did make the car go quicker. Obviously, Gascoigne's right, and the normal race engineer were right there, making sure I don't mess it up.
They changed it in a completely different way to what Benson said. Just didn't tell him.
I don't think I knew that Gascoigne was at Tyrrell actually. I don't think I realised that.
Yeah.
Wow,
good.
that's cool. Right, well we got to find that article then. Andrew Benson, Mika Salo, Autosport, 1996.
Perhaps another string to his race director bow.
Yeah, exactly.
Previous race engineer experience.
George Russell out on circuit now. His teammate Hamilton back in the pits, but Russell is out on the soft tyre. Is he going to start a lap this time? I think he is, because he's staying to the centre of the circuit and doesn't come into the pit lane. So first lap of the session incoming from George Russell. Onto the brakes, into the 90-degree left-hander of turn 1. Exits that. Now into the next 90-degree left-hander, which is turn 2. And then out onto the second straight on the run down between turns 2 and 3. Up through the gears and then into another 90-degree left-hander at turn 3. No curve at that one, so you're right up towards the apex wall. Now into sort of the fiddly parts of the back streets with a right-hander at turn 4, and then into 5 and 6, where you're compromising your run through the left-hander of 5 to try and get set up into 6, and then a little burst down towards turn 7, which is slightly tighter than 90 degrees. And now we're into the castle section, heading into the very quick, very daunting left-hander that takes you through the narrowest point of the track on Formula 1, now up to the top of the hill, and this long sweeping sequence of left-hand turns down towards turn 15, where we see so many drivers going straight on. It's where we saw Daniel Ricciardo and reverse into Daniel Kvyat maybe in the runoff area a few years ago, and then dropping down the hill into the final left-hander at turn 16 before the sweepers and out over the start-finish straight again. And so Russell is doing a lap, Sainz is doing a lap now on the soft, so is Bottas, so is Joe, and so is Charles Leclerc. So both Ferraris out on circuit on a set of soft tyres, and we're going to see their lap time shortly.
Yeah, this is what we've been waiting for, really. The picture at the end of Friday, as I said earlier, was just a little bit kind of blurry. We didn't quite know who was ultimately going to be quickest. It was so close at the end of FP2 between the lead Ferrari and the Red Bulls in general. We didn't get to see that full picture of performance from Max Verstappen, so hopefully we'll get a bit more of that today. But they're all out on the soft tyres, which of course is the tyre, the faster tyre. It's the least durable of the 3 tyres on offer for them this weekend. It's the Red Walls soft tyre. Gives them the most performance, but in a race condition is not going to last anywhere near as long. But that's the one they're going to want for qualifying. It's going to give them the ultimate performance, and that's what they're all out on now, just trying to see what their car will do over the shorter runs of a lap, maybe 2 laps. The red Ferrari of Carlos Sainz now halfway through his lap, first run on softs. Not really got a lap time to match against yet, because at the moment it's George Russell and Mercedes leading the timesheets, but Carlos Sainz looking under control, nice and tidy as he comes down the final part of the lap, down the hill into the left-hander of turn 16, and out of turn 16 it's flat out all the way from 16 through 17, 18, all the way along that very long start-finish straight. Incredibly long flat-out section where the cars reach these highest speeds that they reach at any circuit on the F1 calendar. As Sainz now at a fast first sector, reasonably good middle sector, and he crosses the line to go 8/10 quicker than George Russell. That puts him top of the timesheet so far.
So 1 minute 46.4. Quickest lap time we saw yesterday was Charles Leclerc, a 1 minute 43.2. So 3 seconds off the pace at the moment. Leclerc himself is through the first sector, a 37.1 for him in the first sector. So he too a little off the pace compared to yesterday in the early stages as he comes into Turn 15 now, Leclerc. Through the left, down the hill, and towards 16. Basically the final left-hand corner. He's 1.1 seconds up on Carlos Sainz Leclerc. And he has done a few laps like that this weekend, doesn't he, where he's suddenly gone a second quicker than Sainz. It's been really impressive. He is impressive here, Leclerc, no doubt about that.
It's also a street circuit, as we said, so a lot of lap time comes from running very close to the walls, and you kind of have to build up to that. So the driver can make a huge difference to lap time here, but a little bit like Monaco to some extent, over and above what the car can do. And that was, there's the go. Charles Leclerc, 1.1, nearly 1.2 seconds faster than his teammates. Still some way off the ultimate pace we think they can achieve, but tops the timesheets. We're yet to see a Red Bull on circuit.
Yep, indeed. Verstappen, actually, Perez has just left the pit lane.
He has.
Verstappen is still in the pits. So are Norris, Albon and Ocon. Hamilton has just gone in deep into the first corner. Gone onto the brakes at about 110 metres and then just had nothing when he came to turn into that left-hander. Vettel is back in the pits. George Russell in the other Mercedes. Just getting a look at him really scraping the floor with the bottom of the car as he came through the right-hand kink, which I think is 18. Valtteri Bottas coming out of the final turn, and he is looking to set his first lap time of the session. His teammate Joe is fifth quickest currently on a 1:47.522. Bottas is about a second away in Sector 1 from Leclerc, and a long way away in Sector 2, about a second and a half from Leclerc. So I think this might be slower than Joe here for Bottas, and it is. He goes 6/10 slower than his teammate, Yuki Tsunoda, sixth quickest, but lap times at the moment fairly irrelevant, to be honest, with 43 minutes and a half to go.
So Valtteri Bottas still holds the record for the fastest ever recorded speed in a Formula 1 car during race conditions from his Williams days at this very circuit. I think it was 387 kilometres an hour, which is blisteringly fast, isn't it?
Yeah. But why weren't they quicker in Mexico? Because I remember them being quick in Mexico. They were doing like 230 miles an hour or something. But and surely with the low air what's it called? Air density, is that what I'm looking for?
Yeah, that is the right word. But I think because this is such a low downforce circuit, as opposed to Mexico being slightly, although the air density is less, the downforce levels are jacked right up, and therefore the drag penalty that comes with that is higher. So I guess it must be due to that.
Simon asks a great question. How long does a new circuit have to be on the calendar before it gains more romantic names than Turn 1, Turn 2, etc.? I don't think it's I think people just used to make circuits with names.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a time thing and those have developed. I think they just used to make the track with the name. Even when Silverstone redid itself in about 2010, 11 or 12, something like that, they did new names. Fernando Alonso's just got very close to the barriers on the exit of 2. He was going in too hot, sort of couldn't decide whether to keep going or bail, and then got past the point of no return, had a big slide and carried on his way.
Interestingly, inside the teams, no matter which circuit you go to, you still just refer to turns 1, 2, 3, 4, etc.
Yeah, it's disgusting.
It is.
Monaco, everyone's like, I've run wide at I'm in the barriers at turn 8.
I was shocked when I first turned up in a Formula 1 team, being a massive Formula 1 fan and priding myself on knowing the names of these corners, to look at these circuit maps. I just had 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah. 41 minutes and 35 seconds to go. Sergio Perez coming down the start-finish straight now. DRS opens up and he heads towards the line and he goes second fastest, a 1:45.503, 0.2 slower than Leclerc. Verstappen still hasn't left the pit lane then, neither has Albon and Ocon. So Perez out there, but no sign of Verstappen just yet. 41 minutes and 10 seconds to go. Fernando Alonso now coming through the left-hander and climbing up the hill into the castle section. After his moment a lap ago. Everybody on the soft tyres, by the way, bar Tsunoda and Gasly. So the two Alpha Tauris are the two drivers that presumably hadn't used their set of hard tyres yet this weekend, so they're doing it now at the start of FP3.
Well, much as we say this is obviously preparation for qualifying, and it is, as soon as we go into qualifying, you're kind of locked in terms of the setup of your car. You can't make modifications other than very small tweaks to things like front wing. tyre pressures, that sort of stuff. So you do have to decide now what your race strategy is going to be as well as your qualifying strategy. So the fact that we will get a couple of people, Ricciardo now just emerging on the medium tyre as well. So they have to keep half an eye on what the strategy will be for Sunday and how the compromise between a Saturday car for qualifying and the Sunday race car, the best way to play that off. So it's not all about just finding the ultimate lap time. There is definitely an eye on tomorrow's Grand Prix, particularly I guess at this circuit where, you know, qualifying perhaps is maybe less important than some others. Certainly last time out in Monaco, because the overtaking opportunities here are so much greater with that long straight.
Cameron says Mugello is a fairly modern circuit, but it has great corner names. Yeah, Mugello, when was that built? Like the 60s, I want to say? Mugello? 1974, Mugello, and has corner names. So yeah, what's the most modern track with corner names? Great question, Cameron. Well, you didn't ask that question, but I'm asking that off the back of what you said. Let us know. And Castle Combe is not the answer. Across the line comes Carlos Sainz now in the Ferrari, and he goes to the top, a 1 minute 44.7, so that's half a second quicker than Leclerc, but Leclerc is just starting a lap now. George Russell did the fastest first sector of anyone and now goes fourth quickest, 8/10 slower than Carlos Sainz. Perez is 7/10 off then in third place. Hamilton is coming into turn 15 now, swings it right and then left and then starts the drop down the hill, and compared to Sainz after the middle sector, he's 7/10 away, and has a couple of goes at turning into turn 16, so I don't think this will put him quicker than Russell here. Hamilton, Ricciardo on the mediums up to 12th quickest, Hamilton now up to 190 miles an hour before opening the DRS and then gaining more speed. About to cut the timing beam now. Leclerc is improving. Hamilton goes fifth, so 1 place behind Russell, but 7/10 behind George Russell. A couple of tenths in the first sector. Norris is on a lap, and Leclerc does the fastest first sector of anyone.
The car still looks like a bit of a handful, that Mercedes, at various points around the circuit. It almost looks heavy and cumbersome. I mean, I know these cars are exactly that, but your job as a driver / engineer and team is to try and dial that cumbersomeness, if that is a word, out of it and make it nimble, make it pointy and precise going through the corners. The Mercedes just doesn't look like that on a number of points around this lap.
Leclerc has done the fastest first sector, the fastest middle sector. His quickest time yesterday was a 1 minute 43.2, and he comes across the line now on this soft tyre to do a 1 minute 44.6. So still 1.4 seconds slower than yesterday, but 800ths up on his teammate Carlos Sainz. In fact, lost quite a bit of time to Sainz in the final sector, relatively speaking, because he did the fastest first sector and the fastest middle sector. Although, as I say that, Sergio Perez in the Red Bull has now done the fastest middle sector, and Max Verstappen has just left the pit lane now then. So 37 minutes, 20 seconds on the clock. Verstappen leaves the pit lane. Perez here might be going to the top of the times. It's going to be tight between him and Charles Leclerc. The DRS pops open on the rear of the Red Bull, drives to the line and does go quicker. A 1 minute 44.416, a quarter of a second quicker than Leclerc.
Yeah, and what's interesting, and this was interesting as well yesterday, is Perez seems able to get the most out of that Red Bull car in the early part of the lap. So does a very good first sector. He had the fastest middle sector and then blitzed that final sector that we know suits the high speed of the Red Bull. Verstappen in the sister car wasn't, seemingly yesterday at least, able to get the most out of the first part of the lap, and that's where Ferrari were particularly really strong and gaining a huge part of their advantage. So at this point, and yes, we're yet to see Verstappen, he's just on an out lap now, we'll get a better picture, but Sergio Perez at least looking reasonably comfortable in that Red Bull, like we saw, of course, last time out in Monaco.
So across the line comes Pierre Gasly now. Sorry, it's going to be Yuki Tsunoda first of all in the AlphaTauri, and he's 7th quickest currently. He goes up to 6th quickest, 2/10 slower than Lewis Hamilton, 2/10 ahead of Kevin Magnussen. Bottas is improving, Vettel's improving, Gasly's improving, and that's actually not a bad lap from Tsunoda because he's on the hard tyre. Yeah. So is his teammate Pierre Gasly. Gasly through the middle sector split, and he's a second away, so I think he will go quicker than his teammate Tsunoda, but this is not bad at all for AlphaTauri and Gasly.
No, it's not at all. Yeah, it looks really good. They actually looked strong at points yesterday as well, didn't they? Got a fast package around here, a little bit like the Red Bull. Of course, sister team to the main Red Bull outfit, so sharing the same power unit. But yeah, good showing at this point from Tsunoda, and Gasly goes up fourth quickest, also on the hard tyre.
Got a huge slipstream from one of the McLarens. It was Lando Norris that he got a huge tow from, so that helped him out in the final sector. He did a just waiting to see for the timing page to take over, but it was a very, very quick final sector for Pierre Gasly. Not quite as quick as Sergio Perez, but very fast nevertheless. The sound you can hear now is Max Verstappen. He's through sector 1 and he's done the fastest first sector of anybody, 900ths up on his teammate Perez.
That's encouraging, isn't it? Because we just said that has been all weekend the Ferrari sector, and yet the Red Bulls seemingly now have dialed their car in to suit it. Will it hold that performance? Will it maintain it all the way through the lap? It's coming through the middle part of town now, the central section, through the castle, the very narrow part, through those castle walls. Still going very quickly, looking nice and tidy and under control. If he can maintain this for the rest of the lap, this will be very, very strong. Let's see when we get that middle sector split from Verstappen. Coming down towards turn 15 now, and then down the hill. We're across the timing beacon to get the split for sector 2. And it's very, very close to his teammate. Just 2/100ths of a second behind his teammate Perez, but still very fast. And we've still got that long, sweeping, very fast section up towards the start-finish line. Let's see what Max Verstappen can do.
Here he comes then. Perez has done a 44.4, and Max Verstappen opens the DRS, drives to the line. Don't think he's quite going to beat Perez. He doesn't. But he doesn't 44.4 as well. 500ths between them. So Red Bull 1 and 2, a quarter of a second back to Ferrari, who are 3rd and 4th. Gasly is 5th, Russell 6th, Vettel, Hamilton, Norris, Tsunoda the top 10. Bottas, Magnussen, Alonso, Stroll and Zhou the top 15. Ocon, Schumacher, Ricciardo, Latifi and Albon, the 20 drivers. In a shocking turn of events, I've offended someone. Mike has emailed in. As a retired BBC outside broadcast cameraman who covered F1 in the 60s and 70s, I don't accept that I and my colleagues weren't up to the job. We loved the challenge despite having to identify the cars with a black and white viewfinder. So I think that's more my point, Mike, is
you backpedal now, Jack.
I know, camera stabilizing technology, and especially tripods. You remember what tripods were like back in those days, Mike? These days they are so much more stable and secure, and all of the almost hydraulics that are in tripods these days are remarkable. And also, maybe you covered one F1 race a year or two F1 races.
Jack, you're still digging yourself
I know,
a hole
but
here.
these cameramen these days, they cover every single race, all 23, and they don't have to have a black and white viewfinder. So
I thought the cameramen in the 60s were great.
They were, and Mike was tremendous. But I was more referencing technology, I suppose, let's say, than the actual ability. Because I went to do a job in India once, and the cameramen had never done motorsport before, so they didn't really know which way the cars would go and things like that. But they were all used to doing cricket, so they could follow things unbelievably well, because they're used to picking a ball out of the sky that's doing like 70 miles an hour dropping, so they could track and pan with the cars remarkably. The Ferraris are going remarkably fast. Sainz goes quickest, a 1 minute 44.001, but Leclerc is going quicker still. He's faster than Sainz by 0.2 of a second in the first sector, and this is the second run on these soft tyres, or second lap I should say, on these soft tyres, so they're holding up reasonably well as Leclerc now comes down into turn 15.
This is fast, this one, definitely.
We'll see how much quicker he is than Sainz after the middle sector here, and he's half a second up here.
Wow.
Leclerc flying.
Yeah, so he's into the final sector now, and this is the bit where Red Bull were very, very strong, of course, but he's got such an advantage through the first two sectors, and even still maintaining that. So Ferrari look at this point to have an incredibly quick car. It's kind of what we saw at the end of FP2, definitely not what we saw in FP1. So the work they've done, including that new rear wing that Andrew talked about, definitely working as Leclerc goes half a second quicker than his teammate Sainz. That's two Ferraris heading to Red Bulls.
0.3 slower than he managed yesterday, Leclerc. Verstappen returns to the pits. Perez is improving and is only a 10th away from Leclerc in the first sector. So Perez on a lap now. Graham says Magny Core was built in the early 90s and had corner names. That's a good shout.
I have no rear today, mate.
Okay, copy.
No rear today, mate, says Hamilton to Bono. Perez coming through the middle sector. dropping down the hill into the left-hander now of turn 16 and out onto the back straight. It's a 42.2, so he's 3/10, so he's 4/10 down on Leclerc after the first two sectors. Maybe we'll gain a bit of time back here. He didn't actually improve in the middle sector here, Sergio Perez, as he comes towards the line, so there is more time for him to find out there. He goes second quickest and gains about a tenth in the final sector on Leclerc, so a 43.8, 3/10 away from Leclerc. Verstappen has been through the pits and is back on his way. Andrew Benson.
That's exactly the pattern of yesterday. The Red Bulls gain about a tenth back on the straight, but Ferrari are gaining, or at least yesterday they were gaining 3/10 or more in the cornery bit, middle sector. I guess the question come the race is, can Ferrari, it's still the same question as we had before practice one actually, is can Ferrari fend off the Red Bulls on the straight with, a 12 km/h speed differential, and that's with both having the DRS open. Obviously if one's in front with the DRS closed and the other one's behind with the DRS open, that's going to be quite a significant speed differential.
And will we see those DRS gains that we saw happening in Jeddah, given that this is such a long straight, with the DRS line coming, I think, nearly halfway along it? I wonder there'll be gains to sort of not cross that line first.
But if Ferrari are quicker in the cornery bits, as you so astutely put it and eloquently put it, will they be in DRS range by the time you get to that point at the end of the lap?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? But
that's why I asked it.
If you look at Saudi Arabia as a previous example, for most of the race, Leclerc was doing enough in the corners to stay just out of DRS range of Verstappen. But as the race went on, I think wasn't there a safety car or something, or a red flag that brought Verstappen within range, and then once he was in range, Leclerc couldn't get rid of it, and that's how he ended up losing the race.
Ferrari have also been a little bit worse generally on tyre deg, so as the stint goes on they tend to lose a little bit more performance than the Red Bull does. However, at this particular track, tyre degradation is incredibly low, so it may not be the same or have the same effect that we've seen at other tracks. So I mean, look, this is great. This is set up for an absolute treat, isn't it? Because we just don't know. It's so close. They deliver their lap times in very different ways. We just got to wait and see how that comes into play, both in qualifying, but even more intriguingly, in tomorrow's race.
Andrew, was it an open test you were doing with Tyrrell? Was it all the teams there, or some teams, or was it in October?
No, it wasn't October. I don't think.
Okay.
I think it was. It wasn't warm. I remember wearing a coat.
Okay.
I had on a dark blue Tyrrell coat for it, but it was an open test. But I don't know whether there were many other teams there. I can't remember.
No, because Jago's found a picture of what she thinks it might be, but there's someone driving the Jordan, and she's asked who it is, and I can't work out who it is. Max Verstappen through the middle sector now, through the left-hander, and he's 600ths up on Charles Leclerc on his second run, right over the curbs on the exit of turn 16, and now driving towards the line, and this in theory is where he's going to gain a little more time on Leclerc, although he is dropping away just a tiny bit, coming towards the line now, Max Verstappen, and it is a 1 minute 43.653, so doesn't improve in the final sector and ends up a tenth of a second slower than Charles Leclerc in the end.
That felt like he might have gone into the pits after that first run, made a tweak, maybe to downforce levels, for example, because his lap time there all came from the first two sectors, which, as we talked about before, has been so far Ferrari sectors, and he lost out in the final sector where it's all about the top speed. So I wonder if they're just trying to tweak what they have in terms of trying to match the Ferrari, seeing what Ferrari have done with their car, maybe going a similar direction, and maybe the sweet spot for Red Bull is just somewhere in between, but it's incredibly close. I think that sets us up for an intriguing afternoon ahead.
So Benson's guess on that picture, Jago, is it Colin McRae? So, and we think it is. So good work,
wow,
Andrew. So that were you at that test then, or do you remember that? Or
I don't remember that. No.
Okay. Well, there we go.
I remember that he tested a Jordan.
Yeah.
I couldn't work it out because the helmet didn't work for Formula 1 because it had tobacco logos on it, which for a brand that wasn't in Formula 1 at the time.
Until VAR.
Yeah, but then I saw what I thought was either a UK flag or a Scottish flag on the helmet, and I started and that's how I worked it out.
Smart. 25 minutes and 45 seconds to go. Alex Albon jumps up to 15th quickest in the Williams, but the order is Leclerc, Verstappen, Perez, Sainz, all separated by 0.4 of a second. And yeah, it's tremendous, really, how it's all coming together.
It really could come down to the tiniest of details, as it always does, of course, but it could come down to the tiny details of the specific run. And let's not forget, this is a street circuit. There are walls incredibly close, and the lap time comes from running close to those walls. If somebody gets it wrong, the session could really be interrupted with yellow flags, safety cars, not safety cars today, but yellow flags, red flags. And of course that, as we've seen on many occasions, can really interrupt somebody's flow and somebody's hot lap. So, you know, there's a lot still to play out this afternoon. The lap times are very close, but that's not necessarily the entire picture.
Johnny's emailed in saying in the 1970s, the FIA rulebook was a large yellow plastic pocketbook for all FIA motorsport. F1, F2, F3, touring cars and prototypes that came under groups 1, 2, 3 and 4. He knows this because he owned one. And there was a considerable reliance on the spirit of the rules. So there we go. Just one rule book for all motorsport.
Amazing.
Love it.
I'd love to see that.
Yeah. Ricciardo goes 8th fastest on a set of medium tyres. That's a reasonable run, actually, from Daniel Ricciardo. On the mediums, only a 10th slower than Hamilton and only 4/10 slower than Russell. Hamilton did get a second lap in that brought him a little bit closer to Russell's time. But still Gasly there, 5th on the hard tyres too. So some interesting mixes. We will be seeing some more running on a new set of soft tyres a little bit later on. And we've got 23 minutes and 56 seconds on the clock. A tweet from Michael saying, how ominous is the Ferrari pace given the tracks coming up, Montreal and Silverstone as examples? Have they got this rear wing spot on? It looks very encouraging.
Well, it does, and you would have looked at the tracks coming up and said, look, including this one, Red Bull are on a run here where they could strike a bit of advantage, maybe break out a lead. But look, if Ferrari have found a sweet spot with their car where they can maximise the top speed and bring it at least somewhere close to what Red Bull can achieve, that can minimise any loss on those sections of the circuit. Canada, of course, has some very long straights. Silverstone, a very high-speed circuit too. So if they've managed to find a sweet spot without losing too much performance through the corners, of course, that's the holy grail in Formula One car setup terms. So, yeah, it looks fascinating. I'm loving this. I think it's as close as we could imagine.
Mark Hughes, the Formula One journalist, was at that McRae test, and apparently McRae lapped 1.9 seconds slower than Brundle. And Brundle was 1 second off McRae in the Subaru.
Oh.
1.9 seconds off Brundle's not bad.
No, that's good. And also good knowledge, Mark Hughes.
Have you had to run any sort of celebrity people in an F1 car? Were you ever involved in any of those crossovers or anything? I can't think of any.
Not outright celebrity. We had Jay Leno, but I wasn't at the test. He drove one. We've had some other racing drivers, IndyCar drivers, that we've given a shot in a car for demo runs and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Which is always fascinating because I always love seeing people's reactions when they both get in the car, but then when they come back after a run and get out.
Yeah.
Because most people, whether you're a Formula One driver or a racing driver in other categories, just can't appreciate this. It's actually the braking that's the most impressive thing. When I've driven the simulator at McLaren on a number of occasions, and whilst the acceleration is clearly impressive, it's the braking that catches you out. I mean, I remember tearing down a long straight on my sort of 4th or 5th run in a McLaren, and I thought I'd go for it, and you get towards the braking point for the corner and you think, right, everything tells me I should be hitting the brakes now, but it's a Formula One car, so I'll give it another beat and then I'll hit the brakes. And you hit the brakes and it just stops like that, and you have to embarrassingly get back on the throttle to drive to the corner. So it's the braking for me, over and above any acceleration, that's the biggest shock to the system. And my experience of other racing drivers getting in F1 cars, they have the same thing.
So Colton Herta did a test, and in the McLaren at the end of last year, and his sort of mind was blown. I can't remember. I think he was just shouting so much grip or something like that, I think.
Well, that's it. Downforce, of course, is the other staggering thing. You know, the downforce and therefore the cornering speeds are just the fastest of anything that most people have ever been anywhere near. So, yeah, they're amazing machines, and I was privileged to be part of those people creating them and operating them. And I loved every second of it. But watching the experience of those people lucky enough to get behind the wheel was just also a sort of eye-opening experience.
Stu G says Okayama, which was Aida when it was an F1 circuit, held its first race meeting in 1990 for various veteran drivers and determined corner names by the race winners. Wow. So, so the first corner was named was the first corner, and then there was Williams and the Moss S, Atwood Curve, Hobbs, which I presume is David Hobbs, Piper, I don't know who Piper would have been, honestly, Redman, Mike Knight corner, and the last corner. Interesting.
I love that one. That's my favourite name of the corner.
Yeah, last corner and first corner are nice. But yeah, people just need to be more inventive. It's my favourite thing, actually. Well, it's not my favourite thing about Formula E, but it's one of them, is I just make up corner names when we go to a new track. It's a lot of fun. And then nobody else takes any notice of them. And then the next year, I've forgotten what I called them last year. So I have to make them up again.
What does that say about Formula E, that your most favourite thing about it is that you can make up corner names?
Sound you can hear is Nicholas Latifi coming through, coming up to the top of the hill and around the castle section and down towards turn 15. His teammate Albon has, I think, already done his first run on the... No, I think that would have been his first set of tyres, Albon, that got him up to 15th place, 3.2 seconds back from Charles Leclerc. Latifi is only 2.2 seconds away from Leclerc, so this should bring Latifi up into the mix ahead of Albon, and I think he's the first driver out there on a new set of the soft tyres. Lost a bit of running yesterday in free practice 1, Latifi. The sound you can hear is him coming towards the line now, and he jumps up into 10th place, 2.5 seconds away from Leclerc. Big track evolution on these second tyres then, because Latifi's gone 10th. Owen asks, were you ever involved in the McLaren two-seaters, or was that before your time?
No, it was happening during my time when I first arrived. I never got involved with it, but it was an amazing programme, that. They called it the Adrenaline programme, I think, and they had the two-seater F1 car, they had a fighter jet all painted up, and they had the McLaren F1 road car all painted up in the same colours of our cigarette sponsor, and they ran this programme of experiences that very lucky individuals could get to go in, all three of them.
What, in the fighter jet would fly?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
There was a time as well that Ron Dennis wanted to run a land speed record car.
Yeah.
I remember doing the story on it in Autosport, and it must have been 96, 97 sort of time. It obviously died a death, but their ambitions were high at McLaren at the time.
Yeah.
High on cigarette money.
Yeah.
17 minutes and 50 seconds to go. Fernando Alonso coming through the right-hander of turn 4 now. He is on a lap, Alonso. He's come through the first sector, and he's about a second away from Verstappen's fastest first sector time. Leclerc is quickest currently, but Verstappen has the fastest first sector and second sector, and Perez has the fastest third sector. But it is the Ferrari driver that is quickest overall on the lap. Russell comes through sector 1, and that's a reasonable first sector actually from Russell, although we've seen him be quick at various points throughout the weekend, and in particular the first sector. Alonso coming now into turn 15. He's got Latifi up ahead of him in the Williams, but he keeps out of the way nicely. Alonso is 2.4 seconds down after the middle sector, so this lap might put him slower than Latifi. So it's a bit of an odd one here for Alonso, who was looking rapid yesterday. Yeah,
he was. That is a slightly confusing picture. One of the things that all the teams are having to contend with today, there has been a slight change. We haven't mentioned it happened overnight from Pirelli. They have raised the rear tyre pressure, so they have a mandated minimum tyre pressure. They've jacked that up overnight by 1 psi, I think. So every team has to now run that slightly higher tyre pressure at the rear, and that can be significant. The teams would love to run them as low as possible because that's what tends to give you the best performance. But Pirelli obviously having some concerns about maybe the integrity of the tyres at the speeds that we're seeing here. Of course, we have had problems at this circuit in the past, so by just pumping them up a little bit and mandating that as a legal lower limit, it just firms up the tyre sidewall a little bit and gives a little bit more structure to the tyre. So that will be something that everyone's having to just deal with and factor into their runs today.
Apparently it was Pato O'Ward, says Paul, who was talking about the grip at the McLaren test.
Wow, no rear end.
Russell saying he's got no rear end. Hamilton had none earlier on. Russell did go 5th fastest on that lap he's just finished, a second slower than Leclerc, 4 tenths quicker than Kevin Magnussen. Gasly's on a lap now as he comes into turn 16.
The positive for Mercedes on that note is that both drivers are saying the same thing. It might not sound like much of a positive, but when you've got two drivers talking about completely different problems from the car, it can really confuse the picture as to which direction you need to go to. So both drivers experiencing the same thing at least gives both engineers the same problem, so you get two sets of minds looking at a similar problem, and therefore a better chance of trying to fix it.
Here comes Gasly, 6th fastest, 2 tenths slower than Russell, 1.2 seconds slower than Charles Leclerc. Bottas slots into 8th place, Schumacher goes 9th, Joe goes quicker than Bottas, Joe up into 8th position. Leclerc has just left the pits in the Ferrari, Sainz has just started a flying lap, and the two Red Bulls are in the pit lane. So we're getting into the closing stages of this session and the second runs that we're going to see. And just getting a replay of Fernando Alonso coming into turn 1 and something coming off the back of the car.
Yeah, some extreme bouncing as he bounced along the start-finish straight, and yeah, a little piece of carbon fibre, maybe a floor strake, something like that, popping off the back of the car, and then potentially, was it Magnussen? Maybe running over it. So not a big piece, but certainly something that's, I'm sure, not going to help the fact that it's now missing from the car.
Phil says, did I hear you say you didn't know why a turn was called Piper? Shame on you. It's David Piper. I was not aware of David Piper.
Me neither.
Until just now, but apparently he participated in 3 Formula One World Championship Grand Prix in 1959. So, still alive, I believe. He's 91 now. He entered the British Grand Prix in 1959 and finished it in 1960 and didn't start in France.
That sounded like he took a whole year to complete a Grand Prix when you just said that.
Yeah. Piper crashed a Porsche 917 during the filming of the Le Mans movie and lost part of one of his legs. Wow. Well, there we go. I had not heard of David Piper, but apparently there's a corner at Aida named after him. Aida. I never knew how to say it. How do you say it, Andrew Benson?
Aida.
Aida, okay. Right, here comes Charles Leclerc. He's starting a lap now on the soft tyres, and oof, back end really getting out on him as he came up the hill through the castle section. He set the fastest first sector of anybody. A reminder that his benchmark lap time from yesterday was a 43.2. He's currently done a 43.5, so more than a 0.3 of a second improvement, and he does the fastest lap time of the weekend so far. After the middle sector, Leclerc is 0.3 up. Out of the final turn, neat and tidy, and now it's the long drag to the line. Lando Norris is improving as well on this lap. He'll be the first to cross the line out of the two of them. The Red Bulls are on out laps. Sainz, I think, is just starting a flying lap, or maybe had to bail out of his previous flying lap. Norris goes up into 5th place. That's a bit more encouraging from McLaren because they were a little bit nowhere yesterday, and Leclerc does a 1 minute 43.240, 4 tenths quicker than Verstappen managed, and there's a yellow flag in sector 1, so someone's just had a bit of a moment, I think, in the first sector, and Verstappen might come across that yellow flag as he comes down towards the first corner. The yellow flag is still out there, turns into the left and carries on his way. So it's not at turn 1 then. No one appears to be off there. It's in sector 1, and sector 1 is long. I think it's Bottas.
Certainly going to ruin Max Verstappen's lap. There he goes, backed off.
Yeah, so it's Bottas down into turn 3. So I think Bottas has gone straight on into turn 3 and is currently trying to get back onto the track and do a sort of 3-point turn kind of vibe. He couldn't do his classic Bottas boot, although it looks like he might have tried it because there's some big black lines behind him, so hopefully he's tried to do his Bottas boot and hasn't quite worked.
It's just reverse.
Yeah.
It's not selecting.
Try to hold the downshift.
Yeah, doing that.
Selecting
Stand by.
Selecting reverse in a Formula One car is normally what you do is you have a reverse button on the steering wheel. You have to hold it down for sort of 2 or 3 seconds and then it will engage. But it always seems, because it's rarely ever used and it's not given the same importance or priority, the selector mechanism for reverse often just doesn't work as well. And it's quite a common thing, isn't it, hearing drivers talk about not being able to find reverse.
And it always baffles me in the olden days, I did, but these days, when everything is just so good and perfect, the fact that the reverse never works is
it's
mad.
Also because the car's stationary, and it's much easier to select a gear when the gearbox is turning. You can.
Bottas tried the Bottas boot, but he couldn't. It was too tight in there. But sorry.
When the car's rolling or the gearbox is turning, it's much easier to select a gear because all the components are moving. But if it's stationary, like it always is when you're selecting reverse, if everything's not quite lined up, it often just won't clunk in. So that's often the problem. But it's quite a common thing, isn't it? Hearing drivers say that. That was almost embarrassing. It must be embarrassing for a Formula One driver to try and do the sort of the turn, boot spin and not quite pull it off.
10 minutes to go. Verstappen now is going to start his lap this time around because Bottas has got going again, and we'll see what Verstappen can do. Had to abort his first one. Now the DRS is open as he comes towards turn 1. Onto the brakes at 110 metres, into the left-hander. Now up towards turn 2. Sebastian Vettel is about to improve. Currently 10th quickest in the Aston Martin. His teammate Lance Stroll is 8th quickest. Vettel now comes across the line and goes into 7th place. Just a 10th slower than George Russell. Hamilton is down in 16th. And he's not on a quick lap, so maybe he came through the yellow flags as well. Maybe backing off. Verstappen, meanwhile, we're about to get his look at his first sector time, and it's a 36.5, which is not a personal best, and it's over a 10th down on Leclerc.
Yeah, not quite being able to match either his teammate or the Ferraris in that first sector. Perez does. So 2/100ths up is Perez as he comes through the first sector. So once again, Perez just looking a tiny little bit more comfortable in the Red Bull around this circuit. Verstappen fighting the car through this middle sector a little bit. He doesn't look quite happy with the balance of that car yet. There's still a couple more opportunities to make tweaks. About 8.5 minutes left on the clock. But right now it's Perez who looks like the stronger of the two Red Bulls at this stage. Max Verstappen now crossing the line, there we go, through sector 2, the middle sector, and he is over 2.5 tenths down on Leclerc. Perez will be the next man down through that same sector. Perez coming down through, there he goes, look at that, 4/100ths slower than Leclerc. So Perez still faster than his teammate, not quite able to match the Ferrari, but very close.
Yeah, he might be going quicker here than Verstappen, Sergio Perez. Verstappen across the line and remains second quickest, 2 tenths slower than Leclerc. But here comes Sergio Perez now towards the line. The DRS wide open, cuts the timing beam, goes faster. A 1 minute 43.170, 700ths of a second faster than Charles Leclerc. Couple of tenths quicker than, almost 3 tenths quicker than his teammate Max Verstappen. Sainz is on a lap now, so we'll keep an eye out on him. Through the first sector, he is about a tenth or so away from Sergio Perez, well, 0.099 of a second, but that's a big lap back from Perez, again.
Yeah, it's exciting stuff. This is really, really close, and that's exactly what we want to see. I still think, though, that Red Bull advantage down the straight, and it's smaller than it was yesterday, but it's still an advantage, it's still there. I still think when it comes to race day, that could make the difference. But there's not a lot in it. Oh, Sainz really struggling with the rear end of his Ferrari through the middle sector there, just twitching around as he comes over the brow of the hill. Let's see what sort of split time he can do. He comes through turn 15, the left-hander, which heads him down the hill towards the timing line. Let's see where he ends up. Crosses the timing line. Now he's lost a lot of time through that middle sector. The car didn't look happy, but he's 4 tenths down on Sergio Perez through the middle sector. So this is not going to be a lap that's going to really trouble the front man on the grid, Sergio Perez, right now.
So here comes Sainz out across the line. And what is this going to do? Is he going to maybe get up and match Verstappen? No. He's 4 tenths away overall from Sergio Perez, a couple of tenths away from Verstappen, and a couple of tenths and 4 tenths away from Leclerc and Perez up at the top. So the order is Perez, Leclerc, Verstappen, Sainz, the top 4, and then it's Norris and Ricciardo, 5th and 6th. Good lap from Ricciardo. They're ahead of Russell in 7th. Ocon in 8th, 9th for Vettel, 10th for Pierre Gasly. Stroll, Zhou, Magnussen, Tsunoda and Albon the top 15. Schumacher, Bottas, Hamilton, Latifi and Alonso, the 20 drivers.
You turn the engine on.
AFM Lewis, we're limited on mileage on that one.
Hamilton asking, did you turn the engine down? The team saying, yep, because we're limited on mileage.
Yeah, just to clarify.
Yes, we are in the closing stages, as you say, of the final practice session ahead of qualifying, and it's the race winner from last time out, Sergio Perez, who is quickest at the moment for the Red Bull team. As you say, Mark Priestley is with me. We've also got the BBC's chief Formula One rider, Andrew Benson, with us too. But Mark, this is really impressive from Perez. Monaco maybe felt like something of a one-off with him beating his teammate Verstappen. He's very much the number 2 driver at the team, but all of a sudden he's quicker again. Perez quickest, Leclerc second, Verstappen third, Sainz fourth.
Well, he's just signed a new contract with that Red Bull team, securing his future for the next 2 years, and he's doing everything he can at the moment to make himself not look like a number 2 driver. He looks like the more comfortable of the 2 Red Bull drivers in that car, and at the moment there's very little, almost nothing between them and the 2 Ferraris. We're set up for a fantastic afternoon ahead.
Andrew Benson, was this kind of what we were expecting coming into this weekend, or have Ferrari impressed? Because on paper it's difficult to read this Baku circuit on the shores of the Caspian Sea.
Yeah, it's really hard to read right now as to who's favourite for the race, I would say, and qualifying too. I mean, I came into the weekend thinking Red Bull were probably favourites for the race because they've got quicker, more straight line speed than the Ferraris. So I thought even if the Ferraris qualified on pole and Leclerc would be favourite for that, then Red Bull would be able to potentially get past them in the race. And that does still seem to be the pattern, but Ferrari have made a step forward on straight line speed, but at the same time it's Perez setting the pace at the moment, and that's not what I don't think anyone would have expected, despite him having good form in the last couple of races. So it's really it's really only Red Bull and Ferrari. No one else is anywhere near the picture, but it's adding a bit of extra spice to that title battle.
Yeah, because at the moment it is Max Verstappen who's in the lead of the championship, 9 points ahead of Charles Leclerc, but all things being equal, he shouldn't be leading the championship, Mark. Is that fair to say? Or certainly from Ferrari's point of view, they surely will feel that the Red Bull driver shouldn't be leading the championship.
Well, as much as we thought this particular circuit in Baku might be a Red Bull circuit, Monaco was out and out a Ferrari circuit. It suited their car. They locked out the front row in qualifying, and yet strategic errors and a number of things that didn't fall their way in the race meant they almost snatched defeat from the jaws of victory on that particular occasion, and those points will be ones they may come to regret later in the season as this championship plays out.
Yeah, we've got 2 minutes and 45 seconds on the clock. Everybody has basically done their running, and they're just sort of getting a few more laps in now, but no one's going to improve. And we've spent the last couple of Fridays after practice saying, are Mercedes back? They looked really good in Miami, and then looked quite impressive. I think it was Monaco as well, wasn't it, where they looked quite impressive. They're kind of nowhere here. Russell is 8th quickest. Hamilton is 12th fastest. He's just actually improved, but he's 1.6 slower than Sergio Perez. Mercedes have got nothing this weekend.
They're really struggling with balance issues. Both drivers talking about a sort of instability at the rear end, oversteer. This is a very tight and twisty first part of the lap through the city centre in Baku. It's lots of braking and traction events, right angle corners, and that car just looks big and cumbersome and heavy, and definitely not what a Formula One car should look like, or certainly not what a driver needs it to feel like through there. But they're struggling. Yeah, they've got a lot of work to do. They seem to have gone backwards from where we've seen them in recent times.
Well, that's the thing, Andrew. Mercedes kind of thought they were back, didn't they?
Yeah, I think this is bad news for their season this weekend, because 2 races to go in Barcelona, they introduced a new floor. They thought that had fixed this problem that they're having with this bouncing on the straights, which is an aerodynamic phenomenon, not a suspension one. But it's back with a vengeance in Baku this weekend, and I mean, Russell is 1.4 seconds off the pace, and Hamilton a couple of tenths further back. Hamilton's got his engine turned down at the moment. That might explain the gap between the two drivers, but Hamilton was sort of at a loss to explain that time gap yesterday, and I'm sure he'll be the same today. And it's not great for them that they've introduced this new floor 2 races ago, which they thought was a fix for the problem, and it's turned out that it isn't.
Now, Max Verstappen was just on a really quick lap there. He had done the fastest first sector of anybody and was going quicker than his teammate Sergio Perez, and then he ran into some traffic. Fernando Alonso going slowly in the castle section, up in the old part of town, because this is a street circuit around the capital city of Azerbaijan. And that could have been interesting for Verstappen. He's very frustrated on the radio, and that could have been a chance for him to get towards the front. And he's after something of a redemption, I suppose, after last year, where he had the Grand Prix in his pocket, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he had a massive amount of bad luck with a tyre failure last time out. But that was one of the Alpines, wasn't it? I think Alonso.
Yeah, it
got
was
his way. But look, what Max had done in the first part of that lap was unlock the potential of his car through that elusive first sector, the sector that Ferrari have been strongest all weekend at, and the one that Max Verstappen has struggled even over and above his teammate at, sector 1, and yet he's just blitzed the fastest first sector of anybody. So that at least will be a promising signal for the team.
So how important is this weekend for Ferrari, Andrew? Is it sort of it's not going to be make or break, but considering the points that they've lost over the last few races, the checkered flag is out, the session comes to a conclusion, but how important is it that they almost exceed their expectations? Because they've got to have some races where they overperform, surely.
Yeah, so the championship situation for them in the last 4 races has been bleak. Leclerc was 46 points ahead after 3 races. He's now 9 points behind after the subsequent 4. One of those was a lost win with an engine failure. One of those was a strategy foul up in Monaco 2 weeks ago when he should have won the race easily, because he was, again, just as he was in Spain, he was the fastest car. So they've been shipping points, and they could do with stemming the momentum. It's not the end of the world. It's only the 8th race of a 22-race season. But Red Bull have won 4 in a row, and they're looking more and more and more difficult to beat. And just because if Ferrari lose again in Baku this weekend, it's not the end of the world, but with that momentum building as it is, it wouldn't be great for their championship, I don't think.
Sergio Perez is actually doing another quick lap here too as they come towards the line. I don't think he's quite going to improve his lap time. Got a bit of traffic at the end of the middle sector from Alex Albon, but he does another 1 minute 43.2, and that would have been just slightly slower than Leclerc's lap time. So at the end of the session, Sergio Perez is quickest at 1 minute 43.1, 7 hundredths to Leclerc in second place. Third is Verstappen, a quarter of a second away, but he was improving, and Carlos Sainz in 4th position. So once again, another tantalising battle in prospect between the Red Bulls and the Ferraris, and it'll get underway with qualifying, which will be underway in 2 hours' time at 3:15 this afternoon, Sonia. That was just a little 6 or 7 minutes into 5 Live, and Rob says it's funny listening to them go all professional and serious during the radio links. Very true. And Catherine says the BBC FP3 commentary helped me through cleaning my bathroom. Jack and Mark made it more bearable, with a little asterisk saying other housework is available. Yes. So there we go. Perez quickest again. Yeah. But Verstappen was on it on that lap.
Well, he was, and interestingly, right at the end of that session, both Verstappen and Perez on their final laps blitzing the first sector, going quicker than any of the Ferraris, so quicker than anybody.
And that's quite interesting. We don't tend to see that often. I wrote it off earlier on in the session. Right, we're done. Everyone's done their one run or their second run on these soft tyres. No one's going to get anything more out of it, but then they did.
Yeah, well, the circuit's evolving, of course, being a street circuit, this Formula 1 tyre rubber going down, the more laps that happen, and that just increases the grip level. So that's definitely a thing. The temperatures I actually haven't seen what the temperatures tracked over the course of the session, but typically that would be creeping up a tiny bit as well. So, look, I think the interesting thing for me is not just the overall lap times, but how Red Bull and Ferrari have tweaked their setups over the course of yesterday and again today to really just try and extract the performance in the areas of this lap that they've been struggling with. So Red Bull extracting performance in the first sector, Ferrari minimising the deficit to Red Bull in the final sector, and they've converged on a lap time that's almost identical to each other, and that really is tantalising for the afternoon ahead.
Good for McLaren.
Really solid finish from McLaren, 4th and 5th. 5th and 6th. Lando Norris 5th. Daniel Ricciardo 6th, because they were struggling, as you said earlier, they were struggling yesterday, and they are at the moment best of the rest, but the gap between the top 4 and the rest is huge. 1.2 seconds from the second Ferrari down to the first McLaren. That's the kind of gap that we would normally or often expect the Mercedes to slot themselves into, but from their perspective they've struggled a bit today, haven't they?
Yeah, absolutely. Here's an interesting question, which we don't have time to get into, from JJ Jackson, but he said there was an article in the Telegraph a few weeks back claiming Mercedes' success was really a legacy of Ross Brawn, and the problem now is Toto Wolff is out of his depth. Is that fair analysis? Well,
wow.
Yeah, I didn't read that particular article, but that's quite stunning, and I don't think we'll have time to get into it today, JJ. But message us again with that comment, because that's something interesting to get into. But that is the end of Free Practice 3. We'll be back in, we believe the session, the qualifying is going to start at 3:15, so we'll be with you at that time, maybe a little bit before. Keep an eye on the internet for that. Enjoy the start of Le Mans. If you're going to watch it, this has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live. Perez quickest, Leclerc second, Verstappen third. Qualifying later.